Hi there, hope you're having a lovely day so far. Okay, well, we're here today to talk about the difficult subject of domestic violence, its relationship with home isolation and the COVID-19 era. Now, this discussion is with the aim of supporting anyone suffering, to help provide a voice to the voiceless, and someone who possibly may have reduced support whilst they're home in isolation. Also to provide advice for those who suspect that a loved one, maybe a family member, a friend, a neighbour, possibly suffering from domestic violence, and how to best support them. Now, to talk to us about this today, we welcome our special guest, Christine Craik, the National President of the Australian Association of Social Workers. Now, just a little bit of an introduction about our special guest. For over 30 years, Christine has worked as a social worker in family support, housing, community health and hospitals, with a focus on family violence, sexual abuse and refugees. Now, Christine has a ton of qualifications, and Christine holds a master's degree in social policy and management and is currently completing her PhD. She's a very busy lady. And if that's not enough, she currently lectures the undergraduate and postgraduate social work degrees at RMIT University. Thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And thank you very much for having me.
Oh, no, we're very grateful for your time and we know you're extremely busy, so thank you for joining us. Now, there's a lot to talk about and it is a very touchy subject, so we'll just get started with it, I guess. Yes. But it's been said before that, the consequences of crises and large-scale disruptions are far more serious for people who are already disadvantaged. So in this current situation that we're all facing at the moment, this means that a lot of the visible and invisible impacts of the recent bushfire crisis at the start of the year and now the COVID-19 global pandemic are still yet to be seen and reported on with hard stats. So I'd love to know, to begin with, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I suppose disasters aren't new. Like we've been through horrific bushfires in Victoria in the past, and there has been a lot of research around disasters, bushfires, earthquakes, tsunamis, all manner of disasters that shows us that those that are already sort of in a disadvantaged situation bear the brunt of the disaster. Yep. So we know for starters they've got less in terms of sort of practical resources or material assets to fall back on. So that's one thing, and we've certainly noticed that already with COVID-19. Yep. The people that don't have savings, and let's face it, that's most of us. Most of us live week to week with our wages and with our mortgages, if we're lucky enough to have a mortgage. So we know that natural disasters, including this COVID-19, have a much more profound effect on those that don't have the supports, that might be already living with abuse, and that might not have the material wherewithal that other people might have. Yeah.
It's really important for us to be mindful about that, and thank you for highlighting that point. In many ways, I guess the world has really stopped at the moment, and we have slowed the pace of life quite a bit at the moment. We're not running around as much, and we are spending a lot more time at home. But this doesn't necessarily mean that family violence has stopped. And, with the increased pressures of job losses, unemployment's obviously increased significantly, financial pressures on families, and those living in sort of smaller areas, not possibly even having enough personal space, homeschooling, there's a whole list of different things, of course, that we could go on about. So from that perspective, do you think it has made it a lot harder for people who are affected by domestic violence to actually reach out to others for help and support at the moment?
Yeah, look, definitely that's been the case. I think when we're looking at family violence, we're really looking at a behaviour that's based on sort of power and control. And so if you're talking about a perpetrator who expresses his control through abuse of his family members, his partner and or his children, at the moment there are a lot of things that are out of his control. So often in an effort to maintain control or to feel in control again, those behaviours ramp up. And that's what we've seen, a ramping up of those behaviours, a ramping up of that kind of risk. And I suppose if you're looking at some of the other pressures that come in from, you know, some of those external pressures that come in, maybe a loss of job, loss of income, as you say, everybody's staying in the one place, that makes it a lot harder. And we also know that perpetrators of family violence often enjoy a lot of the more sort of masculine roles in our society. So we know perpetrators of family violence are more likely to be interested in pornography, interested in masculine pursuits like hunting, I suppose, shooting, fishing, things like that. I'm not saying all hunters and shooters and fishers are perpetrators of family violence by any stretch of the imagination. But I do know that some of those activities that take some of these perpetrators out of the house have also been stopped. So, you know, it's much more of a powder keg effect within that home at the moment.
Mm. And along with this, I guess it's been said that the sector, the family violence sector, has not so far reported the expected increase in demand for its services at the moment. But this situation really is far from being anything that's positive. And if anything, it's quite concerning as domestic violence support services are reporting a 30% drop in callers asking for help, which is really alarming and quite frightening. So can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Okay, well, I think that statistic was more so the beginning towards the middle of April. Things have started to ramp up in the meantime. So we know that, I've got a few statistics here. We know the family court has had a 40% increase in urgent applications to do with family violence. We know the federal circuit court has 23% increase. The magistrates courts that deal with intervention orders has had a 50% increase in the last few weeks. Calls to women's legal services have 50 to 90% of those calls are related to family violence and COVID-19 issues. So we know that a lot of that the calls are starting to ramp up, and it may not be to, say, crisis services to say, get me out of here, but it may be to legal services and other services to say, what can I do about this? What are my rights here? I really need some help.
Yeah, I'd actually read before that the professionals in the sector had interpreted the previous the stats I was talking about before, the 30% drop in requests, was basically a sign that those who are basically self-isolating with their abusers no longer feel safe to ask for help. So do you think that these family members and their children or anyone in this scenario is more at risk at the moment of sort of like violence and I guess than ever before at the moment, given that they are sort of stuck in a very close environment with their abuser?
Oh, I definitely think the risks have increased in the last 4 to 6 weeks well, in Australia. I mean, we can only talk about what's going on here, I suppose, but I know it'll be reproduced everywhere. Yeah, definitely so. And I don't think, you know, before, when, as I said, you know, perpetrators would go out to do their hobbies or go out to their jobs or go out for a drink at the pub or whatever it was, it would give survivors a chance to call and talk through and get some sort of consultation on what's going on for them and how to keep themselves safe and a bit of safety planning, etc. Whereas they don't have those opportunities at the moment. Yeah, that's definitely right. And we also know that from what we have heard from women, that perpetrators are using COVID-19 as another tool for control. So it's the you can't go anywhere, or I will go everywhere and do everything. You have to be there, or you have to go out and do all the shopping because I can't put myself at risk, or, you know, all those sorts of, you know, in whatever way they can use the lockdown to control, they're using the lockdown to control. So we know that's happening. Yeah.
And this is quite interesting because not all abusers are men against women. So 1 in 9 men experience severe partner physical violence from the other partner, being possibly could be a female. So can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Look, that's certainly true. All abuse is wrong, regardless of who's doing it to whom. Control and power in a relationship has no place. Equality and respect is what we want in relationships, not the other. We do know that most men who present to agencies for support around being victims of abuse, are victims at the hands of another man. So we're talking same-sex relationships here. But of course, we do have men who are victims of family violence at the hands of a female partner. That does happen, and there's no excuse for any kinds of abuse at all. We know there are differences in female to male abuse than there are in male to female abuse, and we know that, well, for example, the risk for a woman being killed is the most, at its largest, is the most great within that 6-month period of a woman leaving a relationship, that separation. That is when most women are killed in Australia in the domestic violence context. We know for men that doesn't correspond for a woman on man abuse, if you like. So we know there are subtle differences in the way these things play out. But again, there's never any excuse for abuse. And yeah, of course, we need to be working towards relationships where we look at equality and we look at respect. But we also know that family violence is on the continuum of what happens in a society where the genders aren't equal. So, you know, we know who wins and who loses in our society in terms of gender equity. And that is one of the main reasons why we have those statistics around gender so skewed towards women being victim survivors and men being perpetrators.
So if someone watching or listening this right now and is directly affected by domestic violence, however, are finding it difficult to reach out, what advice do you have for them?
Well, I suppose, look, anyone who's sitting in a situation at the moment, they know, most of them know the risks. Most of them are very well aware of the risks that they're sitting with. I would say to somebody like, have a look at your safety plan, do some safety planning. When are you most at risk? Where is that most likely to happen? How can you keep yourself and or your children the most safe when you know these things are going to escalate, or when you know these things are escalating? That's one thing, sort of to try and take care of your own safety as much as possible, because victim survivor doesn't have much control, really any control over a perpetrator's choice to use abuse, but there may be little subtle things they can do to keep themselves a little bit safer, in terms of, you know, not being in a kitchen where the knives are, not being cornered in a room, like just trying. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, God, I hate to make victim survivors feel like they're the ones that are responsible for keeping themselves safe. But have a think about your safety plan. If you're talking to someone who you know is very supportive and knows what's going on, have a code word with them. You know, it could be a sister, could be a mother, could be a girlfriend next door. It could be something as simple as, you know, I really would like to borrow that recipe now. Anything like that can let a neighbour, a friend, a relative know that now is the time to call the police, that you're really quite afraid or fearful for what's about to happen, because you're quite well aware that the escalation's been going on all day or for the last hour or whatever it is. So just really try and we're just sort of telling women what they already know. You know, they're hyper vigilant. They know what they're living with. They spend a lot of time doing what they can in terms of those really small but very important acts of protection for themselves and their children, and it's consistent. So yeah, just be aware, be wary, reach out to people if you can. Call Lifeline, call 1-800-RESPECT, call Safe Steps if you're here in Victoria. Have those numbers, look those numbers up if you can.
So what if a viewer or a listener is concerned about a family member, a friend or a neighbour about being affected by domestic violence? How can they show their support without making the situation more difficult?
Well, I suppose stay in touch. Okay, make sure you're calling them, make sure you're talking to them. If that's at all possible, you know, like touch base with them, you know, at least a few times a week to see how they're going. If it's quite an honest relationship and you really know what's going on and they've told you what's going on, make sure, as I said, you have some sort of code work or some kind of knowledge about that. But also some of the domestic violence agencies, you know, Safe Steps and some of the agencies that are around in the various suburbs, Berry Street and what have you, Eastern Domestic Violence Outreach Service, they will speak to friends and family of someone who is living with domestic violence. They're a good place to go for a consult. You can ring them up and say, I'm concerned about my neighbour, this happens, what should I be doing, how can I assist her? They'll have some really local information around what's available in that area as well. So if you're a friend or a family member of someone that you're really worried about, you can do your own research. Google domestic violence support, have a look at Family Safety Victoria's webpage if you're in Victoria, or 1800 Respect's webpage. Have a look at some of that stuff to find out where you might be able to make a phone call and have a conversation with a family violence or domestic violence expert to have a chat about the things you could do to support someone.
Okay, thank you. That's great advice. Okay, so we published your article titled Family Violence and COVID-19 Hidden in Isolation. Now, for someone who hasn't read the article, could you please give us an overview, what it's about, and just tell us what inspired you to write it?
Well, it was just to make people aware, I suppose, that family violence, just because we're all in lockdown now or all in isolation, it's not something that's going away. And I guess in those first few weeks too, when the calls to the agencies decreased and everyone was sort of, oh, is there really going to be a problem here? It's really important to know that, yes, there is a problem here. Just because we're not hearing about it or we can't see it doesn't mean that it's still not there. So it was just drawing attention to that issue and the problem that it's there. But also there was a bit in that article about subtle financial abuse that's going on at the moment. So at a time when we're at the most, I suppose everyone is at the most stringent about what we're spending our money on, and that fear and anxiety, and they're not knowing about the future and what's going to happen to the economy. They're talking about how the economic recovery is going to go on for a long time, as well as the health recovery for this. People are very worried about what they're spending their money on. And early statistics and research that came out of the stimulus package really showed some subtle differences in gendered spending of that money. So we know that women were spending more of their money on groceries, on bills, on what they had to do for the children. And we know, and this is again very generalisation, so the men out there that were spending their money on groceries and bills, we're not having a go at you, but we know that more men were spending money on gambling, on gaming and things like that. And I mean, you've only got to turn the TV on now to see, the sports bets ads are still on, all that sort of stuff is still going. So we know that money is being spent in those areas, and not on the family, and not on groceries, and not on the bills, and not on the things we need to do. So people don't often think of that kind of gender difference in spending as subtle forms of financial abuse, but it's exactly what it is. If someone's spending the family money on gambling, well, it's just not there to pay for the gas heater, or to pay for extra food, or whatever it is the family needs.
Yes. Well, can you tell us, I guess, how you see that crisis situations such as, obviously our current COVID-19 pandemic, and also the summer bushfires at the start of the year, how does this actually increase family violence incidents?
Well, I suppose it's again around that lack of control, isn't it? So if you have a certain portion of the population that feels a sense of entitlement to control what goes on around them, and now all of a sudden they can't, and their usual means of control, or the usual idea of what they can and can't control, has gone out the window. They want to try and find that somewhere. And perpetrators choose to control their families because they don't use those same tactics on their bosses or their work colleagues or the people that they catch the train in and out with, or anything like that. They save these behaviours for the people that they lived with. So it really is that sense of entitlement over their family, and they choose to exert that control over those who they think are the most vulnerable in their life and who they have a right to control. So, we're hearing stories of, as I said, of perpetrators using this lockdown as one of their tools, as one of their weapons, bringing strangers into the house and telling their partners that they're bringing people in that will give everybody COVID-19, making them very fearful for what's going on. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, how can survivors and or their friends and family have access to services if they need help leaving a violent situation during this time?
Yeah. Well, we know that third-party calls to police have increased. VicPol in Victoria has talked about this third-party calls, as in you're not in the house, you're the neighbour or whatever. Those calls to police around family violence incidents have increased. So we already know that it's out there on people's radars when they're hearing what maybe years ago we would have termed as a domestic or an argument. People are starting to think, no, that's not a domestic or an argument. I can actually hear that someone is trying here to have the power over somebody. Somebody's in trouble in the house next door. So we're hearing that, and that's coming out in the statistics already, which is fantastic. So I would urge people to continue to be vigilant around their neighbours and what's going on in their neighbourhood, and to call for assistance if they need it, because the police have got their own operations going and ramping up around this time as well. And I also know that, as I said before, safety planning. If you're concerned about a friend or a family member, have a chat to them about what would be a good way for you to help them. How could you help? Is there a code word if they ring you? As I said, can I have that recipe now? Or, I found ants in the kitchen, or something really banal, something like that. That would be a code word for, you need to call the police, or could you come over here because I'm afraid about what's going to happen next? Those sorts of things. Let's just be vigilant about what's going on.
And what generally happens then? So when someone makes a call, so they, as mentioned before, you hear your neighbour, and or you have concerns about that other person being affected. So you call the police. Is there anything else you should be saying to the police, or generally what sort of happens from there on?
Well, if you call the police and you can say that you can hear some trouble in the house next door, and you think the woman in the house next door perhaps might be in a bit of trouble, like often it's not the first time. Often the police might have the local police station might have on their records that they've been to that house before. But if that's not the case, the police, as I said, they're taking this very, very seriously these days. So the police turn up, and they then, sort of have a look at the situation, try and work out what's going on. I mean, it's not the police's role to start trauma counselling or working out what's going on, but it is their role to make sure that everybody there is going to be safe. Perhaps take out a family violence safety notice that will have conditions on that notice that will make it illegal for the perpetrator to continue with that behaviour, whether the perpetrator is removed from the house or not. If you've got a family violence safety notice until it gets to court for an intervention order, if you've got that first notice, there's a list of behaviours there that are now illegal. I mean, let's face it, abusing someone should always be illegal, but that's not the way it's looked at in this country when it comes to domestic and family violence. But if there's a family violence safety notice and the police have written down a list of conditions that a perpetrator is no longer allowed to do, which includes committing family violence, it might include having someone under surveillance, it might include asking a third party to have someone under surveillance, all those sorts of things. Once that's breached and broken, then a perpetrator can be criminally charged with those breaches.
What about child protection services at the moment? I know that when children usually are in the early education sector, when they're at kindergarten, preschool, daycare, educators, as part of their job, sometimes have got to just keep their eye on just the health and wellness of children, provided that at the moment the children don't have a lot of that added sort of external exposure, and the likes of Berry Street and all these wonderful organisations that do this work. Can you just make a comment on I guess what is happening at the moment with child protection services?
Sorry, Bella, stop. That's my beautiful dog. Look, the issue of child protection at the moment is a huge issue for those that work in the field, whether they be teachers, police, social workers, whoever it is, because we know there are vulnerable children out there, and we know for a lot of children school is a safe place, or a place where they can go to get away from what's going on within their home. We also know that a lot of teachers and social workers and child protection workers are well aware of who these children are and the families that they sit in. So I know, for example, that there are a lot of social workers that are outreaching to those homes, whether it be through phone calls or through computers, or even through turning up. And I know the same with the teachers. The teachers are really encouraging those vulnerable children to be attending school, so that they've got some sight on them, some eyes of sight on them, and we know what's going on for them, and we can see how they're going. Yeah, but it's a real worry at the moment, because those children, a lot of them are hidden at this particular point of time. But I suppose for any worker really who's out there, and especially social workers that work in this field, I know there is a myth, and sometimes it's a true myth, that women don't like to report because they are afraid of child protection. And often a perpetrator will have said to a woman, if you call the police or if you call welfare, they'll take the children off you. You're going to lose your children, and that's how that's going to happen. But I know more and more we have social workers now that are concentrating on the behaviours of the perpetrator and the consequences of the perpetrator's action, rather than seeing the mother as someone who has a failure to protect. They're seeing the perpetrator as someone who has a failure, who where the failure sits. So there's been a slight shift in that pivot from who we're looking at when it comes to family violence, and who we're looking at when it comes to responsibility for the family violence within a family. So I think the COVID-19 situation might assist that, or it might just stretch out that pivot. I'm not really sure, but things are certainly changing in that field in terms of who we look at, whose behaviour we're looking at. I mean, mothers, not just mothers, but non-offending parents all over do an awful lot to protect their children, and do an awful lot, or there's an awful lot of those acts of resistance. So even if you've had a night where you've been abused all night, even getting up that next morning, getting up for those children, making them breakfast, at the moment ensuring that they're sitting down and starting on their schoolwork, and that the house runs smoothly, etc., that's huge protective behaviour by a non-offending parent in the face of the ambushing that's going on by the abusive parent. So we often don't look at all those little acts of behaviours, acts of protective behaviours that keep children, balanced, if you like, in a family where a perpetrator's abusing members of that family. So, those are the sorts of things that we need to be looking out for, what's actually happening in those homes to protect those children and to keep that balance going.
Well, we know that women are afraid that they may lose their children if they reach out for help about family violence, and that children are also at risk of violence themselves. So I'd love to know from your perspective, how can social workers help to keep families together but still address violence?
I suppose the first thing is always the risk, okay? You've always got to address risk. So safety first, no matter what. And having said that, what is her understanding of the risk as well? Because most non-offending parents that live in a situation like this have got a really good understanding of the risk in which they live. And they work extremely hard, as I said before, to try and protect their children from the abuse and from the consequences of the abuse, and even from the knowledge that the abuse is happening in the home, although that's pretty hard to hide from anybody. Yourself, when you walk into a room where there's even been an argument, you can feel the tension in a room. Well, kids pick up on everything, don't they? So there is a huge myth out there too, I think, that women in this situation neglect their children because a lot of the attention is on meeting the needs of the perpetrator. And what I've found over years of practice is that women actually neglect their own needs. Yes, there's a lot of attention paid to the needs of the perpetrator. It has to be to keep everything smooth, but they also attend to the needs of their children quite well. And it's their own needs that they neglect in these sorts of situations. So it's important that we remember this as well. As I said, you need to pull out and address all the protective behaviours that woman is doing in that family. So you really have to have those conversations with the non-offending parents about all the things that they're doing, every little thing, bringing out every little act of resistance, every little bit of protective behaviour. You need to validate what she's doing. You need to believe what she's telling you, and you need to affirm what she's doing as the right thing to do. You might need to talk to her a little more around safety planning and how to keep herself and the children safe. There may be things that that she doesn't know. For example, internet safety, IT safety. It's really, really important for you to have that conversation with a woman around, well, who set up your phone? Who set up the computer? Who knows the passwords? What's going on? Is it safe for her to be Googling 1-800-RESPECT on the family computer? Does she know how to get rid of the history of her searches on that computer? Things like that. So those are important conversations to have with women as well around you know, what goes on there. But then who would she go to if things went down? Who can she call on for help? Which neighbours will be supportive? Which family and friends would be supportive? How would she call them? How would she get there? You know, just thinking through some of these things, because if it's a high risk situation and a woman has to get out or has to get herself and her children out, she is going to be in a state of heightened anxiety. I mean, everyone in the house is. So you need to have maybe had some of those conversations and rehearsed some of those actions with the woman before that happens, so that she can just automatically do what it is that she has to do to get out and keep herself and her children safe.
So, I mean, what can the wider community do in this scenario at the moment to address the culture around family violence? And that's, I guess, in the immediate future, and then obviously long term.
Forever. Well, I suppose at the moment, just be aware that it is going on, you know, hidden around you, in houses around you, and be aware and wary and look out for those signs. You know, if you've had your suspicions about a family or a family member or a friend or whatever, maybe touch base with them sometime in the next few days and just see how she's going, see how the family's going, how's everybody traveling. You know, let them know that you're a safe person to talk to if something is going down like that, and that, you know, you would believe them. And I suppose on the long term, really, as a community, we need to call this out every time, always. We need to call out gender inequity all the time, because it's gender inequity that contributes to this ridiculous situation that we find ourselves in with family violence. So every time you hear a sexist joke, you know, be that person that stands up and calls it out. Every time you're aware that at a workplace that women aren't being promoted, but a man might be being promoted that just doesn't have the same skills as the person next to him, call those things out. If there's unequal pay, call it out. The way women are treated in sport compared to men, call it out. Let's just not stay silent about this anymore, because we need a community that's going to be very different for our children. I don't want my daughters and my sons and my grandchildren to inherit this earth the way I found it for women. You know, like it's just not good enough. And we don't want another generation of children growing up traumatized in homes where there's abuse going on. We can't afford it.
Do you think that there has been a positive shift towards that in the last 5 to 10 years, or not enough?
I don't think there's been anywhere near enough, because we're still having as many women killed and maimed and injured as we always have had. But I think there's more awareness of it now. So I think you've got to face what's going on before you can address what's going on. And I think we're starting to do that now, slowly, bit by bit. But I do see a difference in the number of conversations, I suppose.
But obviously we need a lot more. And it takes a lot of courage for people to be, maybe for the first time, sort of, you know, speak their truth and what they actually do think about a situation. As you just mentioned before, be it if it's in the workplace or whatever, what have you, it takes a lot of courage.
Absolutely.
To do that. And do you have any advice for anyone in possibly in that scenario where they do hold some personal beliefs and values, but they haven't ever expressed them before?
I suppose find some people you trust, like, you know, have some sounding boards, find people you trust and talk about a way forward with some of that stuff. I mean, even asking neighbours to call the police is difficult. You know, these are people that you know, and you know them in a different situation, and you're hearing something going on. Even calling 000 and hearing what you have to go through, you know, police, fire or ambulance, who do you want, what state is it in, what's your name, all that can be overwhelming for some people. But, you know, we all need to step up. And the first time you do it, it will be a little bit nerve-wracking. It might cause you some anxiety. If you have to do it the next time, you'll know that little bit more, and the time after that. I think it only takes practice for us to be sort of standing up for these kind of principles.
Look, we've sort of, and you've touched on so many critical and important topics and issues today. If you were to summarise your key messages for any viewer or listener today, what would they be?
I suppose it would be, don't be complacent, because we know it's happening. And at the moment, there are those complications of isolation and people being out of sight. So be more vigilant as a friend, as a family member, as a sister, whatever. Be more vigilant around those sorts of things. Stand up and speak out if you can. And if you're in that situation, stay safe, have your safety plan organised, understand who you can call for some assistance, and keep doing the work that you're doing to protect your children.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you've shared with us today some important links and different sort of businesses that people can reach out to. So could you just maybe just share them again, and we'll definitely include the links in the show notes. But you've mentioned Berry Street, they're only in Victoria. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if you're looking at national, I suppose the national number would be 1-800-RESPECT. So I know there are trained counsellors on the phone there that are trained in family violence and dealing with family violence. So nationally, that would be a great one to start with. Every state has their 24-hour domestic violence crisis hotlines. You know, I know in Victoria that's Safe Steps. In other states, I'm not sure, you know, where they are because I'm Victorian based, but it wouldn't take much for people to be able to find their 24-hour crisis line for domestic violence in their states. But 1-800-RESPECT, I know, is nationwide. So start there.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. And if anyone else has got any other questions and would like to reach out to you and or the association, whereabouts can they find you?
Well, the website, the Australian Association of Social Workers, just get on that. You can find the state you're looking for, or just send through a random inquiry or make a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Really grateful for your time, and thank you for all the wonderful information that you've shared today. Take care, and really hope for opportunity again in the not too distant future. Thanks, Christine.
Yep. Thanks, Rachel. It's been great. Yep.
Wonderful. Thanks. Bye.